Twice the text says that he investigated, he inspected. It's a word, it's a medical word. It was used whenever you would probe a wound to kind of see how nasty and how bad it really was. He's really looking in carefully. He's assessing the damage in a very particular and comprehensive way. And I can't help but imagine as Nehemiah is inspecting the walls, he's beginning to sink in on him exactly how big of a project that this is. And maybe he felt a little bit of despair, maybe he didn't, but he's inspecting the wall. He's on a fact-finding mission. What Nehemiah is doing is he's doing a little bit of walking before he does any talking. And there's a lot of wisdom in that as well. If God's given you a burden or a vision or he's called you to do something big, one of the things you might want to do first is do a little bit of walking before you do some talking. Do a little bit of inspection before you do enlisting. One of the things that some commentators think Nehemiah was doing is that during those 3 days when he was just in the downtime, he wasn't investigating, he was just kind of relaxing. Some people say that Nehemiah was in the marketplace. I think this is probably true. He's rubbing shoulders with people. He's going to church. He's beginning to meet people that he's never met before. And why would that be? Because Nehemiah, he's never been to Jerusalem. His whole life he's lived in Persia. And so he gets into the city. He's saying, who's the leaders in the city? Who's the gifted carpenter? Who's the gifted metal worker? Who's the gifted ditch digger? Though you probably don't need a gift to dig a ditch. Who's the one that just loves to dig ditches? That poor soul. Who's this? Who's that? Who's the high priest? Who's the person at the church? He's beginning to assess all the people that are in the city. And I think when he's going through and he's inspecting the gates, he's saying, here in the dung gate, we're going to need a ditch digger. Right over here in the valley gate next to the pool of Siloam, we're going to need a really skilled craftsman because this one section of the gate needs a craftsman. And maybe over here, at this gate next to the temple, I'm going to enlist the high priest and his family because they're already at the temple and they can work on it in their off time. And maybe over there at this southern part of the gate, I'm going to bring in a metal worker because it's a metal gate. And he's got a master plan because he took a little bit of time to investigate. And you should do the same. Other reason you should investigate before you initiate is because the people who you're going to tell your vision to are probably not as excited about your vision as you are. We've all been there, right? You've got a vision, something that the Lord has asked you to do. Maybe it's some project. Maybe it's something with your kids. Maybe you're going to be a PTA president or you're going to start some ministry. And I've never experienced this in my marriage because it's a perfect marriage. But maybe in other marriages it's experienced this. I'm joking, of course, but not really. But there, you tell your spouse your vision, and you're so excited and you're smiling and you're exuberant and you're just waiting for her or him to just jump on board and to share in your excitement, and they go, huh. It's kind of like when your wife brings home clothes that she's bought or maybe furniture or something. Is not the right response, is it? Ooh, ah, wow, those are good responses, but But you get that, don't you, when you have a vision, something big. Maybe you, as a leader in your company, you're going to cast the next big thing. This is going to take us to new places. And they're not as excited as you are. And you know what happens? It kills your dream. Gets you a little bit discouraged. In fact, if you're a spouse and your spouse tells you something about their vision, don't say, huh. Say, wow. Say anything but huh. Because if they're not going to tell you their vision, they'll tell somebody else, and you don't want that. So Nehemiah waits. He does a little bit of walking before he does some talking because he knows that he's got to do a fact-finding mission. The other thing that fact-finding missions do as it relates to your vision is that it helps to confirm and further define whatever vision it is that God's asked you to do. It may be that as you're fact-finding and maybe God's called you to a certain mission, maybe it's Romania or Haiti or Brazil, and He's called you to be a missionary there. As you go there and you begin to start looking at the facts, all of a sudden you realize, maybe this isn't from the Lord. Maybe it was bad pizza. Maybe it was a bad Allsup's burrito. Maybe I got it wrong. And that's not to say that it's not the will of the Lord just because it's hard. Because just because it's hard doesn't mean that God's not in it. As you look at the book of As you look at the 10 spies, Joshua and Caleb and the other spies, 10 of them were turned off. It was too big of a deal, but it was the Lord's will, and it took someone like Joshua and Caleb to see it. So just because it's hard doesn't mean that the Lord isn't in it. But as you begin to do some fact-finding as you begin to do some fact-finding work, what God will do in that time as you're investigating is that He will begin to confirm if this is His will or not. And there will be a fire in your bones, something that cannot be quenched. And it doesn't matter how big of a job it is, as you're fact-finding and that fire's not getting put out, that means it's from the Lord. But if then it's gone. Maybe it wasn't. It may be a good idea, but maybe it's not God's vision for your life. The other thing that it does is it further defines whatever vision God has given you. You begin to see things that you hadn't seen before. You begin to be able to answer questions that you couldn't used to answer. And all of a sudden, you have a little bit more excitement. All of a sudden, you have a little bit more clarity. And as you begin to present your vision to the people who you're going to present it to, they have a little bit more clarity and they get a little bit more excited. And so there's a lot of wisdom in relaxation and investigation before you cast the vision.